Do all religions lead to the same God?
If you believe that God doesn't exist and that religion is simply creating a false God in your head, then obviously all religions are the same and they all lead to the same place, the fertilizer pit. The statistics on death are very impressive. 1 out of 1 die. And if you've just created God in your own head, and if that's all God is, a creation of the fertile human imagination, then obviously there's no truth to it. So we are born and we die and we become fertilizer, and that's the whole story. But if there is a God who actually loves you and me, if there is a God who loves us so much that he wants us to spend eternity with him in heaven, and there are not a lot of people that want to spend eternity with me. So if God really wants to spend eternity with me, wow. So if there's a supernatural God, then it's possible for there to be life after death. But when you study Buddhism, you will notice Siddhartha Gautama Buddha never once talked about God, and Siddhartha Gautama Buddha talked about nirvana after living a life where you learn to work off your karma by following the noble path. I have a ton of respect for Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. He grew up in a very wealthy home. He turned his back on materialism and he lived the life of a deep-thinking human being who wanted to bring an end to suffering. And the way he thought he could bring an end to suffering was to cut off human desire. And so Buddha taught people, cut off your desire. And if you cut off your desire, you will free yourself from suffering. You know, I disagree with that. I don't think that I can solve the problem of suffering by just cutting off desire. I think that's moving away from reality. What Jesus Christ said is, you got to hunger and thirst after righteousness. In other words, Jesus says, you better have desires, but you better learn to distinguish between right desires and wrong desires. And so Jesus points out that when you put your faith in him, you're going to desire to clothe the naked, to feed the hungry, to visit those who are sick and in prison, to solve problems. Because God has given you a rational mind, he's given you a conscience, you have the ability to love and to genuinely care for people. Hinduism teaches that all of reality is one, and that the real problem with the world is we live in this illusion of individuality. We distinguish between that object, that person and that person. And so Hinduism teaches you work off your karmic debt and you become one with everything. Jesus Christ contradicted that. Jesus Christ taught that your individuality is a precious gift from God. And Jesus taught that in heaven you will have a new body. You will be you and I will be me. Jesus validated the importance of your personhood. That's why love is real. Because we're not machines. We're not robots. We're persons with souls, which means we can really care for each other. We can really love each other. We can choose to live in relationship with each other. We can choose to live in community with each other. And that's what God intended when he created us. Now, Islam is a fascinating religion. It takes a lot out of the Old Testament, and a devout Muslim believes more about Jesus than a typical American does. A devout Muslim believes that Jesus was born of a virgin, he ascended to heaven, he's coming back a second time. But they also believe that Jesus is not God, and they believe therefore God would never have allowed such a good prophet as Jesus to die on a cross. So Judas Iscariot probably died on the cross and Christ was whisked off to heaven. But unfortunately, Muhammad lived 500 years after Christ, so obviously Muhammad never met Jesus. The eyewitnesses, those who saw Jesus, clearly insisted that Jesus claimed to be God, that he died on a cross, he was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and 3 days after he was put in that tomb, he rose from the dead. And over a period of 40 days, he appeared to over 500 people who saw him risen from the dead. Well, you can't have it both ways, friends. Either Jesus is God in human form, as the Gospels insist he claimed, or he's just a good teacher, the way the Quran teaches. I respect Muhammad for the way one of the 5 pillars of Islam is to give alms to the poor. Muhammad was an orphan, a poor orphan, and he benefited from the philanthropy and the altruism of some people around him. And that's wonderful. And so he makes one of his 5 pillars, give alms to the poor. You see a poor person, you help him. And that's good. Bravo, Muhammad. I respect that. I think that's awesome. But when it comes to loving God and knowing him, Muhammad missed the boat. He essentially taught you can't know God. God's unknowable. He's so great. Jesus Christ said, no, God loves you. You can know him.